Red Sparrow, starring Jennifer Lawrence, is hitting theaters this weekend, and some people are calling this the R-rated Black Widow movie that they have always been looking for. I didn't quite find it that way. My name is Roth, Cornet, here with Mr. Dan Murrell.
Yes, and I also did not find it to be that at
So
all.
let us talk about what it is. First of all, what's your overall impression of the film?
I thought it was okay. It seemed like a fairly generic spy thriller. There were some twists and turns to it that I think if you are familiar with the genre shouldn't be too hard to spot. There's some things that I kind of saw coming a mile away, which you don't want in a movie like this. It was generally okay, but I kind of took it as it is a fairly standard twisty-turny spy thriller onto which they have grafted some pretty brutal elements that you're seeing right now. Some provocative things that I think mainly exist in the movie to be used as conversation points. I didn't really think that a lot of the more, I guess provocative would be the word for it, elements of this movie serve the function of the movie in any meaningful way other than, a lot of people think that if a movie looks brutal, then it is brutal. I didn't really find that to be the case with this movie. So I thought it was a perfectly functional spy thriller with some arguably unnecessary flourishes added.
So I would agree largely with that. I think that when people are looking at this as a Black Widow movie, it's because of some of the obvious reasons. Jennifer Lawrence is playing a Russian spy. She goes through an intense training program, not unlike Natasha, aka Black Widow, does. However, they are very different kinds of spies and very different kinds of assassins. One is, they're neither really assassins.
No.
But one is, in terms of Black Widow, that's very much action driven. She is ferocious in her brutality, and one is a honey trap. She is trained to be a sex spy. So that's a very, very different thing, which isn't to say that Black Widow doesn't use her wiles as sort of like a distraction technique, but that is 100% what the Sparrows are.
Well, and that's kind of where the disconnect was for me, which is that is kind of the setup is we're going to train you to use your sexuality to become a better spy. Okay. But then the rest of the movie doesn't really have that much to do with it because you bring in Joel Edgerton, who plays an American spy, and it's kind of the story between them. And I kept waiting for that element to kind of play any important function in the story between the interplay of those two characters. And it doesn't really. It kind of goes on from that point as this sort of like, ooh, this intrigue, double cross and twists and turns. But that element of it doesn't really play into the second half of the movie that much, which is what confused me because it is being set up like that. It's like, we are training women to use their sexuality to be a better spy. Okay, that's a very upfront and provocative thing, and they do some things in the first half of this movie that kind of feature that. The second half, though, just seemed like a fairly generic movie, and they don't really pay off a lot of what they did in the first half, which is where that disconnect seemed to me. It's like that's why I question why some of those elements are even present.
Well, I think that you can read this movie on a couple different levels. One, I think the biggest mystery that I'm seeing out there is the pull quotes from most reviewers right now, and certainly they're not necessarily selecting what's pulled out, is Jennifer Lawrence uses her sexuality as a spy. That is not what happens in this movie, and I want to be really clear. The second thing is that the school that she goes to has both women and men. They are both training women and men to use their sexuality as spies. Jennifer Lawrence doesn't voluntarily use her sexuality in this movie. It is forced upon her again and again and again. She is a ballerina at the start of the film. There is a tragic accident that happens, which you'll see what happens there. Intrigue and so forth. And then she is without money, without an income, without her livelihood dream, her childhood dream. Her uncle comes to her, who offers her this opportunity and by I say offers, he coerces into it.
Right. And this is all in the trailer. We're not really giving
We're not
away
giving anything away. This is 100% just the basic setup that's in the trailer.
Yeah.
So at that point, the movie becomes a couple of different things. One is a pretty generic spy story in which Joel Edgerton is in the CIA. She's working for Russia. There's a mole, and she's tasked with getting the name from Joel Edgerton, right?
Yeah.
So Unfortunately, 90% of that storyline is pretty predictable. You can see where it's coming. And a lot of the time, though Joel Edgerton's acting is tremendous, as always, he's really good in the movie.
Yeah.
All of the actors are very good in the film, though. Some of them hang on to their Russian accents better than
Some of
others.
them are a little more Russian than others. Jeremy Irons is a
Jeremy
great actor.
Irons is
not the best Russian.
Not the best Russian accent in the movie.
Yeah.
It really just turns British at certain points. But that piece is very, very predictable. And then the other read is this film that is actually, and I think people are saying it's very of its time in this way, although it was based on a novel that was written, I believe, in 2013, and correct me if I'm wrong, and certainly in development before that, that is dealing with a woman who is being continually manipulated and having her sexuality become a tool and a weapon for other people to use. And again, men are as well in the training program against her will, and how she is going to take her power back. That's, I think, that the story that people are resonating with and responding to. For instance, Lawrence, who's the director of this film, directed Jennifer Lawrence in The Hunger Games, is obviously very intimately connected with her as an actress in a non-sexual way.
Yes.
But he really focuses so much just on her face and her expression and what she's going through. The problem is the driving engine of the spy story isn't fully there. It's not fully realized, and it's too long.
Right. It's very long, and again, like the themes that you just described are really strong themes that I think you could have gone very interesting places with. I just don't think the movie really goes anywhere with those themes. And apart from just the thematic elements of the movie, so much of this kind of hinges on the interaction and the relationship between Joel Edgerton and Jennifer Lawrence. I didn't think anyone was particularly bad in this movie, but I never really felt a connection between those two characters in the sense, other than a broader sense of just like, are they playing each other or are they not playing each other? And I think that for the story to go any meaningful way, at some point you have to feel a legitimate connection between those characters. I never really felt that, and I think that kind of hurt the movie in my eyes too. It was them kind of just very dryly talking to each other in a series of rooms around the world. I never felt much of a connection between those two. I think that hurts the movie as well. And yeah, you know, I just think it could have gone some very interesting places, and I don't think it ultimately did. And, you know, that's not a crime. It's not a crime for a movie to be okay or bland. But when you have this movie, which is kind of marketing in its thematic material, and like you said, Francis Lawrence, and that's the discussion around the movie, I think when you're setting that up, and then you don't particularly, in my eyes, pay that off, I think that's where it's kind of like, well, then what was the point? Because there are, aside from the provocative elements of the movie, there are some very brutal parts of this movie that are not easy to watch and easy to sit through. And when you get to the end of this and you feel like, you know, it was in service of a fairly generic spy story, you know, by the time you get to the end of this 2-hour, 20-minute movie, part of me was thinking, like, parts of this movie, like, why did I have to sit through that? We could have gotten to this end result without putting the audience through this ringer, and it's the kind of unnecessary elements of this movie that really stood out to me that just seems so kind of, I don't know. Something just didn't jibe right with me here.
I mean, I think tonally speaking, it is a little bit mixed in the sense that when you're looking at sort of a hardened, hard-boiled kind of spy story, then you want the spies to be hard-boiled. Joel Edgerton, who really should have far more edges, and again, I really love him as an actor. I think he's good in the movie. His character as a CIA agent, right, is pretty soft.
He is. I was watching him. I was like, he's not a great spy.
Yeah, he's really not a great spy. He has a lot of heart, and he's far less suspicious than he ought to be. And there's just certain choices that he makes that don't jive with who that character ought to be in that world.
And it's fine to have a character that that is weak as a character, but again, the movie never really exploits that. It never really goes after that. I kept waiting for someone to take advantage of that, and that, you know, opportunities kind of pass by, and I'm like, so is this just like kind of a poorly drawn character as opposed to one with flaws? That's the kind of debate that you have to have.
And there's also some just logical inconsistencies, even in terms of the technology that they're using.
There's one big
there's
one.
one big one
is this
where you're
set
like,
1993.
you for a minute, you literally question what time period it's taking place because they should not be using that piece of technology at all.
Yeah.
And I won't say what it is. You'll know.
You'll know when you see it.
Don't worry.
Yeah, it's something I have not seen in person
many years.
for like 15 years.
Yeah. So there's that, so there's just a number of things that feel inconsistent, and there's a good deal of time spent between Jennifer Lawrence and Joel Edgerton and kind of this unfolding game of cat and mouse. That's too predictable to spend too much time there.
Yeah, well, and that's kind of my final takeaway, which is that, they do the spy movie thing, which is they set up different elements in the movie, and then as the movie draws to a close, they kind of bring all those elements together to kind of paint the big picture of what's going on. And the other thing this movie does is kind of when they start putting the pieces together, it's the things that they're showing you are things that you've seen. So they show you certain things early in the movie that kind of raise your flags to like, oh, why'd that happen? Or why did she do that? Or why did he do that? And it has you anticipating these things. Whereas I think, and it's just a trick of editing. There are points in the movie where they could have showed you less, and then it's kind of how it works is a big reveal. They show you less up front, and then at the end they go back and they show you the shot that you didn't see, or the scene of the line of dialogue that you didn't hear, or the movement that you didn't pick up on. And when they do this in this movie, they're showing you the other side of things that they hinted at or just flat out showed you earlier in the movie. So it's kind of like a magician who's doing an illusion and is showing you him pulling the cards out of his sleeve, and then at the end goes ta-da, and you're like, I just saw you just showed me all of the mechanics to this trick as you were doing it. So
it takes away the mystery.
It takes away the mystery. And so apart from everything else, I think again is when this movie comes together, just on a craft level, I think the movie tips its hand way too much. It shows way too many things that they could have gone back and revealed at the end. And so, I think there's so many missed opportunities, and there were interesting places that they could have gone, and they just took a very kind of middle-of-the-road approach to just about everything. So, I wouldn't say don't go see it. It wasn't terrible, but I also can't recommend that you run out and see it. I think it's fine. I think if you're a fan of spy movies, you're going to be able to probably pick up on 80% of what's happening as it goes, and that kind of lessens the surprise at the end as you put the pieces together. And there's some people are gonna go to this movie for all different reasons. But it's okay.
I think what it has going for it is, so if you look at it as if it's supposed to be this thing that is realistically tapping into this genre at all, it's not. But if you look at it as something that it is soapy and it's kind of frothy in moments and it's enjoying itself, but it doesn't fully go there either because it's trying to be confronting with the idea of sexuality that is used as a weapon, but not just the person using their sexuality as a weapon, but your sexuality being used against you, being manipulated and controlled. And how do you get out of an untenable situation? How do you outthink and outsmart the people that are that are using you and cornering you that way? And you're meant to feel quite triumphant about that. To me, the most interesting parts of the movie actually were in the training place, the training facility, because we haven't seen that previously, and the most brutal, psychologically brutal character exists there, which is their trainer,
their headmaster, who you barely get to know during the movie.
Who you barely get to know, but she is such an interesting character that to me that was like that was the piece of the film where I felt fully engaged and a little bit disturbed for sure, but I think you're meant to.
Yeah.
So whether the film itself is doing what it's critiquing with its lens, I don't know. Is it manipulating and utilizing Jennifer Lawrence's appeal and her sexuality? Or is it turning it on its head and saying, you know what? Fans have used you this way. The media has used you this way. The world has viewed you this way. And now take it back to yourself. I'm not sure, but I think that's actually the most interesting question about the movie.
And I don't think they answer.
And I don't think they answer it, but maybe that's the thing. That's the thing that I would recommend you explore. But if you're going to be taken by a spy drama, you will know exactly what is happening a long time before. And it is a good time commitment that I don't think pacing-wise does move.
Yeah. Yeah, kind of a mishmash. Sounds like sort of a, I don't know. If someone was going to ask you, should you go see Red Sparrow? I would say, I don't know. Maybe if you have the time. What would you say?
I would say if there are no other films that you want to see this weekend and you really want to go to the movies, sure. I think it is a movie that is worth seeing, but perhaps and financially it can wait until it's available at home and you can take a look, just kind of like to take those explorations. There are things that work about this movie, but there's enough that don't, that I would say if you're deciding between this and another film, there are some great films out currently in theaters that you can explore. You can go see Black Panther if you haven't seen it. You probably have. You can go see Annihilation in theaters.
So many people saying I couldn't find it within 2.5 hours. If there is a theater playing around you that's playing Annihilation,
you could go
I'd
see
recommend that.
Annihilation. There's a movie that Dan is going to review later today. You can go see Love, Simon. There's plenty of movies out there that you can see both at home and in theaters. I do think that this will be an interesting conversation piece, and there are things that you may enjoy about the film.
Maybe.
Maybe.
Not altogether unenjoyable. What a ringing endorsement. Thank you so much for watching this review of Red Sparrow. I'm Dan Murrell.
I'm Roth Cornet.
We'll see you next time.